when you take a recipe and you look through it, there's so many little clues to how people lived and how people cooked. I mean, what I find with the earlier recipes, they really are just they're almost poems in a way.
Hello, I'm Natalie from Genealogy Stories, and welcome to Twice Removed, the show where we talk about everything history related. Hi there, I'd like to welcome my guest today, Paul Couchman. Paul is a food history expert. He's really hands-on with his history. He runs online history food courses, and he's also is it a volunteer, Paul? Is that the right word? For the Regency Townhouse, which is a fantastic building in Brighton, and I'm really excited and also hungry already, just thinking about food. So hi, Paul, how are you?
I'm really well. And look, it's a pleasure to talk about history and food together with you today. I love it.
Thank you. So can you tell me, how did you get involved in food history? And can you tell me a bit about the kitchen that you discovered as well? Because I think everyone would love to hear about that.
Well, those sort of things came together really because about 5 or 6 years ago, I was helping as a volunteer do up this space, this kitchen. And when we finished it, to say, I learned plastering and I did a bit of woodwork and all those sort of things, a whole team of people. And we put this wonderful 1830s kitchen back together again. And there was no real purpose for it afterwards. And so people didn't really know what they were going to do with it. And so I decided, well, it's an old kitchen, you've got to cook in it. That's the main thing. So I started cooking in it. And the first thing I did was mince pies from an old recipe. And just at that moment, when you're standing there in that old kitchen, creating something, an old recipe, and bringing back a space to life, again, when you're cooking, there's something so magical about that. And I was standing there, in the space where a servant probably stood, making the same thing as they probably did, probably 200 years before me,
Yeah, I can totally understand.
Yeah, it's like time travel, but really, really, really time travel. And I was getting these like chills, when I was doing it, and I was thinking, oh, this is it. And so since then, we've just done loads of it, and other people have joined in and stuff as well. But
brilliant.
That's when my love for it started. So it was purely that space. That space sort of drove me to find out more.
Okay, so I know you call the kitchen in Brighton that you restored as part of the Regency Townhouse.
Yeah.
Can you explain what exactly is the Regency period?
Yeah, we've got a very broad view of it, because you can get very narrow and just concentrate on the section when king, when the Prince Regent was the Prince Regent, which is basically what's 1780 to, I've got my dates, 1812. It's roughly that, isn't it? It's a very short period. What we do is call the Regency period in a sort of stylistic period, and that really goes right through. I think we talked before about William IV, the king that everyone forgets. So we're actually in William IV period, which is sort of the late 1820s, I think 1829 to 1837, just before Victoria. So it's that in-between period. But we categorize the whole thing as Regency, because basically Regency styles, especially in architecture and cooking, they carried on right through that period, So they start from about 1780, but really, especially in Brighton, really go on to about 1850. So buildings are still built in that Regency period. And
it's my favourite. It's my favourite style. It's beautiful, big sash windows, and
isn't it amazing? Yeah,
it is lovely. But what were kitchens like during that period, and what kind of equipment did they have? And can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, so we've got a very upmarket kitchen. The houses were really meant for rich people, and so would have had a great big range, which would have been cooking, continually throughout the day. So that place would have been really hot, and because of that, you've got these wonderful skylights above the kitchen. It's a very tall space, and you've got these skylights to let all the air out and bring the ventilation in, and also light, because of course at that period, light was very expensive. Oil lights, candles, all very expensive, and so you made the most of daylight. So it's got a beautiful sort of top lighting, which is really, people love that now. And it's all tiled, and we've got like sculleries and larders where people, sculleries where you do the washing up, and wet and dry larder where you keep the food.
Okay.
And also, I mean, at the end of the space, and luckily we still got it. We've got a beautiful dresser, so it's vast. I mean, it really is massive. And that's where they kept, you know, all the crockery and stuff. You keep that on very high shelves, and it's all been restored. It looks beautiful. Yeah,
I know, I've seen it on Instagram. It is beautiful.
Yeah,
I will make sure that the account is tagged in the video, because it is
yeah,
a
you've got to
really
see the
beautiful
pictures.
restoration.
Yeah.
It's how did they kind of keep the food cool? You know, you mentioned about a storage there. What kind of techniques did they use to try and make the food last as long as possible?
So, I mean, they would often shop quite a lot, because the market, luckily for us, is very close by. So, unlike, you know, a lot of those country houses, they could just pop out and get a few things. But they have got, like, what do they call them? Wet larders. So you probably know it from your gran. I mean, my gran had one as well. You've got those indoor larders. They've got them on a larger scale. And what you've got is the back doors would have opened onto these larders. So that space could be relatively cool compared to the kitchen, which is boiling hot.
Yeah.
And it's got what we've got a lovely one. They call it a meat safe, and it's got grills, wired grills in front of it to let the ventilation through, but to keep all the flies and maybe very keen rats, you know, who wants to climb up, to keep all of those out. So that's sort of it's sort of what people did for fridges then.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I was talking to my nan. So my nan's in her 80s. So obviously my great grandparents were born kind of turn of the century, 1900, and I was asking her about you know, technology and in the kitchen and domestic technology, really, and how it, you know, how it influenced her, you know, how things changed throughout her lifetime. But she was saying, you know, her mum never had a fridge. Her mum didn't have a fridge for years and years and years, until probably like the 50s or 60s. And she was saying they used to have a marble, a marble shelf that would keep everything cool, you know, which is I find it hard to imagine. I'm like, my fridge is always ram packed with three kids. I'm kind of constantly, I try and bulk buy, and I've got a chest freezer in my garage, and I love it. It's like one of the best Christmas presents I've ever had. And I quite often think, like, how would I have coped, you know, without? Although they did have ice houses, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's really for the rich as well. And again, these great big pits where they would buy great big chunks of ice. They dropped them in the winter, and they'd keep cool underneath the ground, basically, for a long, long period, and they could just chip bits off. Because especially ice cream is very upmarket, very prestigious, you know, to have that on your table. And so so you needed the ice. You needed the ice to make the ice cream.
Yeah, I'm guessing ice cream would have cost a fortune, because you'd have the sugar as well, which is expensive.
But also the labor. I mean, it takes ages. There was on the Repair Shop, they actually it's a TV program on BBC, and they actually had one of those old ice churns that made ice cream. They restored it for this guy. And basically, what it is, I don't know if you've seen them. They're like buckets, and they've got an internal bucket, and then you put the ice around on the outside, and they usually put a bit of salt in as well to keep it even colder. And then you turn it. So you've got that, you know, how we make ice cream now, a sort of custard, basically, with eggs and milk. And you put that in the middle section, then you turn. But obviously that takes ages, doesn't it?
Yeah. They're really expensive.
Yeah.
So obviously not everybody had a kitchen. In fact, I'm guessing, you know, probably the vast majority, especially in cities, didn't have kitchens. So what would they have done? Would they have shared kitchens? Would they have done street food? How did they survive?
Yeah, a mixture of both, basically. Most people had access to some sort of boiling water, because they often had to do their own laundry and stuff. So most people had a copper. And so most people, I mean, a good proportion of the population, that's the way they ate. So things like, and I love this, puddings, you know, all sorts of puddings, meat puddings, sweet puddings. These could have been cooked in their copper with the laundry. You know, you just take the laundry out afterwards, and you have basically, I don't know if you've seen them, but they are puddings that are bound up in a cloth, and then they're dunked into the water. And what you can do is have lots and lots of different puddings all going at the same time. So people lived on puddings, and if they didn't, if they wanted something roasted or baked, they would go to the oven in these. You know, the baker would have an oven that people could use. And there's these lovely stories about people, especially men, for roast dinners, all taking the roast down to the baker, and they would take it and they'd stay while it was being baked in the oven. So it was quite, you know, all these men together, And then they would come triumphant back to the wives and the families with the roast, which they, hardly only really just taken to the baker. They hadn't really done anything, but they would obviously get all the praise for that. And it was a way of male bonding as well, that all the men got together and chatted together while the women were at home.
You can just imagine that. Yeah, you can just imagine that, can't you? Yeah, no, I've got to take that joint to the baker. Well, it does take a few hours. Sorry about that, but I'm working hard.
And I think often they would have alcohol as well to keep them.
Yeah, presumably they paid for the oven. Presumably they paid like a couple of pence or something to use the oven. Yeah.
And it's a great way for the baker, especially on a Sunday. If you think about the way bread is baked, the oven would have a rest period, and the rest period would be used by renting out the oven space to the people in the village or the town. I love it. And the other thing you mentioned was street food. Street food was, there was just so much of it. We've got lots of street food now. In a way, we've got a resurgence, or we did have before the pandemic came along. We had a resurgence of all that wonderful food you can get on the streets, especially in London. You can get everything, can't you? And so they really, fish and chips, when that came along, people just ate a lot from the street if you wanted a good hot meal, and it was cheap. And they had very, masses of different sorts of, jelly deals, or all those sort of peas pudding, everything you could buy. It was all for sale on the streets.
My granddad loves jelly deals, and I was really brave and tried one once, which it was off like a dodgy vendor in Portsmouth, so it probably wasn't like particularly brilliant, but he really enjoyed them, and I couldn't stomach it at all. So at one mouthful was like, oh no.
There's still There's a few shops in East London, aren't there? Still
he grew up in London, so he's a Londoner. So, but I love that about food, though. You can tell where somebody's from. Sometimes by some of the things that they ate, and having lived by the sea quite a lot, that makes a massive difference as to what kind of food's available. But talking about food history, it's quite nice to sort of wax lyrical about the different dishes, things. But why is it actually important? Like, why do we need to know, or why would we want to know about what people ate? What can it tell us about the past?
There's so many different things it can tell. Even when you take a recipe and you look through it, there's so many little clues to how people lived and how people cooked. What I find with the earlier recipes, they really are just almost poems in a way. There's just a few words. I'm just going to grab one actually. So I just read you out a section and get you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Get you an idea. So this is a recipe for plain cake. It says a plain cake, and it's got Mrs. Swain. I don't know who Mrs. Swain is yet, but I'm going to find out. Take 2 pounds of fine flour, which make into dough. Melt 6 ounces of butter and pour over it. Beat 2 eggs, 6 ounces of sugar, and a little pounded cinnamon and mace, a few currants and raisins stoned. Mix all these ingredients together. Put in a tin, previously buttered, and bake in a moderate oven. It is very good. It is very good, it says here. Yeah, it is very good.
This is my recipe. It's very good. I won't tell you how to make the dough. You're just going to make a dough.
No. So, like I said, assumed knowledge. Do you know what dough is? Do you know what temperature your oven is? Do you know how long you have to bake it for? All of that information is just not kept in there.
I guess oven temperature would have been difficult, though, because how would you? I guess ovens wouldn't have been electronic, so it would have been difficult to get an exact temperature. Yeah, no, please do. I'm guessing, so please do.
And there's also, back to I was talking about Bridgerton as well. Bridgerton, there's a lovely scene where they all go downstairs and get some warm milk, and they have to work out how to turn the oven on.
Yeah.
Which I think is amazing. Basically, the ovens are really hard. You've got to stoke them up. It takes a good half, maybe 3/4 of an hour to get it all going. Like you're setting a fire up. Once you've got it going, the temperature will drop. And what they tended to do was use the oven according to what temperature it was at. So you couldn't just turn it down like we do. So when it's hot, you put the things that need to be baked hot, and you have all your pies and your biscuits all lined up ready to go in at certain times or certain temperatures. It's all very clever, and they worked it all out.
It amazes me how they did that with bread and cakes, because I've done it before where I've turned the oven up too high, put the cakes in, and then thought, oh, it's too high, and turned it down, and of course my cake sunk immediately, and I was like, oh no. And same with bread, if you don't have the right temperature, and bread's fussy sometimes, so it amazes me how they managed that. I'm guessing they must have had different ways of judging it.
Oh, trial and error as well. But yeah,
Okay.
I mean, you know, you learn how to use the oven, and those ovens are apparently brilliant. They're basically big tin boxes with the heat goes all around them. That's how ranges work. So you've got a fire which sort of circulates, very clever, circulates hot air all around this box in the middle that's the oven.
Okay.
It's very similar in a way to oh, my thing's gone. Very similar in a way to very similar in a way to the to ovens work now. You know, it's the same principle, but completely what's the word? Not random, but it takes a bit of knowledge to use it.
Yeah, I bet there's a real knack to it. So do you have any favorite recipes, and if so, why?
Yeah, and this is my utmost favorite is a fruitcake recipe, which is absolutely delicious, and which I make for when we still could. I used to make it for the tea room, and people adored it. It was a lovely fruitcake with lots of, you know, it's got orange citrus in it, orange zest, raisins, currants. You know, it's got brandy, mace, all these lovely Christmassy flavors, and it's just a lovely fruitcake, and it also lasts quite well. So that's my favorite one, and I just saw it. It's in there. It's online as well. So please, I beg, you know, you must try it. You must try it, because it is really one of the nicest fruitcakes. And it's got pedigree. You know, it's been, you know, it's in a book from the 1830s, and it's still delicious. Yeah, they knew what they were doing with their cakes.
What sort of access did they have to spices and herbs? I'm guessing by 1830s it was, you know, kind of similar to what we have now, really, to a certain degree.
Yeah, it really depended on how much money you had.
Yeah,
I mean, you could get it. Yeah, I mean, it was obtainable for middle class people by then. You know, it wasn't just, you know, in the medieval period, it's basically court food. It's the royal people that are able to access spices, but it filters right down, so people have access to those sort of things. You know, even the working classes to a certain extent, especially, you know, we've got this tendency, you know, Christmas and those sort of feast days, we overindulge in spices, don't we? And that's what the working class would have done. So that's when for the holidays and the feast days, and for fairs, you know, with gingerbread and stuff, that's when you would taste the spices for those special occasions. But they wouldn't have it on a daily basis.
I've read quite a few newspaper articles where somebody wealthy in the area has paid for everybody in the village, or all the poorer people, or all the boys at a school in a city, for example, to go and have a Christmas meal. So they'd all turn up, and that seems to be quite common. I've come across that quite a lot going through the newspapers, and I love that idea that they'd once a year treat the minions to this big luxury meal, you know, which I'm sure they really enjoyed, because they just wouldn't have had access to the amount of meat and things like that as well. But I'm guessing people grew their own herbs like they do now, you know, herbs that grow. I think people tend to think, well, you could fall into a trap of thinking the food was quite bland, but actually there's no reason why you couldn't have grown bay leaves and rosemary. And
depends where you were, though. I mean, if you're poor in the city, I mean, no chance.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I don't know when allotments came in. Much later, I'm guessing.
But what's quite sad about all of this is that, especially towards the beginning, 1820s, 1830s, people lived mainly, you know, in the countryside. You know, and the cities would, you know, it was different, and that changes dramatically through that period. So from the 1820s onwards, things just changed completely until, you know, until about the 1860s, when most people are living in cities, and people's fortunes in food and stuff changed completely. So you're actually quite well fed in the beginning, but the poor really were really badly fed by the late 1880s, 1890s. Well, you know all the stories. You know, it's just hideous. The urban poor is, it's awful. Yeah.
I think you see that right up until the Second World War to a certain degree. I mean, I've read about people in the city kind of all going in and joining forces to buy a pig, so that they could then kill the pig and have the bacon during World War II when everything was rationed, because they didn't have access to the food that the people in the countryside had, freely growing around them, and were therefore suffering the consequences of rationing a little bit more. So yeah, it is that urbanisation, I think, had a massive effect. So we've talked a little bit about cookbooks. Who was writing these cookbooks?
Oh, Well, from the 18th century onwards, so you've got the 1700s, you've got lots of women suddenly coming and writing cookbooks. So there's a few, my favorite, I've got them all around here, but basically Hannah Glass was one of the first ones, about 1747. She's really influential, and that book got published more and more. A lot of Hannah Glass, and probably everyone knows about Mrs. Beaton.
Yeah.
A lot of Mrs. Beaton is actually Hannah Glass. Because she just reused it. I mean, that's what happens with recipes, especially. And Mrs. Beaton was more of a recipe collector than a recipe developer. And so she's more of a journalist. She's very young as well, so she didn't really have the kitchen experience that a lot of the other cooks did. There's another few called, there's Elizabeth Rundle, there's Eliza Acton as well, who's really important. Have I got my copy? Yeah, it's back there. I've got a wonderful copy of Eliza Acton. She's writing about the 1840s. Also much better than Mrs. Beaton. So Hannah Glass, Eliza Acton, those are the two I really recommend. And the recipes are great, and you can cook them, and they really work, even now.
And who were they? Were they just quite middle class, wealthy ladies that wanted to share their knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, usually they I think most of them worked in some sort of way as housekeepers, and then work their way up to actually producing books, because obviously that earns more money. Hannah Glass is very interesting because I love this fact about her. Her book, when it first came out, was by subscription only, and it was available in a china shop. So you went into your china shop, you write down your name, and once they had enough money and enough names, they published a book.
That's genius.
Yeah, it's lovely way of doing it, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think Dickens there was some sort of subscription model to Dickens as well, wasn't there?
Yeah. That's such a good marketing ploy as well, to have it in the china shop. I think when you're running a small business like we do, you kind of, I was just thinking about Mrs. Beaton there. You spend a lot of time putting content out into the world, and then you look at somebody like Mrs. Beaton. That's exactly what she was doing. She was repurposing content as and doing marketing.
Yeah, she was. She had a background in journalism, didn't she? And her husband helped. It's a fascinating story. Yeah. I mean, a very shrewd businesswoman, basically, and that's what it was. And of course, she died, and the name just carried on as a sort of brand right through to about the 1920s, I believe.
Yeah, I'm sure she was only about 28 when she died. She was really young, wasn't she?
Yeah, really young.
So if they were writing the cookbooks, who was reading them, and what does that tell us about the role of a housekeeper and their literacy?
Yeah. So what you find is the middle classes need these books because they have to keep up. To have good status and to have any sort of influence, you need to hold good dinner parties. And if you don't have all the knowledge yourself, or you can't afford to have the best servants, you need some sort of publication that will help to guide you. And so that's what a lot of these books were doing. They were helping out the middle classes with their domestic, difficulties. And you see in this period as well that people are desperate for the servants. There's a real fight to get the good servants. And you hear about rivalries between houses. If you've got a good housekeeper, she might be taken away from your good cook. They might be like whisked away by one of your neighbours. With you're better off with a bit more money. Yeah.
Well, so what sort of things did a housekeeper do? What do you know? Tell me a bit about the role.
Yeah. So the house, if you're in a very rich house, you have two people. So you have the cook and the housekeeper. Well, you have the butler as well, of course. But the housekeeper's mainly supplies in. She's in control of all the stores. So her rooms are usually in the Regency town, anyway. The room is at the front of the building. So you can see people coming in and out. And she has lots of cupboards for storage, things like soap, anything really, serviettes, tablecloths, candlesticks, tea, maybe some of the more expensive spices. They're all kept in that room. And the cook and other servants would have to ask for the things they need. And then the housekeeper would keep a note of all that, the coming, the outgoings and everything. So she would have to be quite numerate. And it's also a role with responsibility. You've got you're looking after your employer's money. Yeah. So it's and often what we have found as well is that the housekeepers were sometimes relatives. You had sometimes maid and aunts that were employed. They were sort of taken in and given work. But imagine. So I mean, imagine the difficulties that would have employing your own family. It's not easy, is it?
No, it makes you wonder how many housekeepers that like you, because you wouldn't want to annoy your housekeeper, would you? You know, because you suddenly little tiny things would go missing, but you would never know. You'd be too busy, having teas and dinners to notice.
The housekeeper in the townhouse, she's got a lovely room at the front, and we've actually created a fictional character that don't you, called Mrs. Finnegan, who's on Twitter, and who delivers housekeeping advice all over the internet, all over Twitter.
Yeah, it's brilliant. No, I love it. It's such a clever idea. Really brings history to life, things like that, I think.
Yeah, that was the idea, just get these voices, because probably a theme of what we're chatting about is you've got these voices that of people that I tend not to leave much trace of them. So when I look at a recipe, even the recipes in these sort of books, and like I said, it's all, well, I probably haven't said it, it's all handwritten, but you have to have traces of these people that, of these ordinary people, ordinary cooks, ordinary housekeepers, and the traces of their lives are in these recipes, and that's the only thing that's really left. And I think that's so beautiful, isn't it?
I think so. I think a lot of the genealogy community talk about recipe books that they've had passed on to them, and I'm always totally envious. I mean, my mum tried to make tiramisu, and she got mozzarella and mascarpone confused, so it was like half tiramisu, half pizza, and so there's no way any recipes are going to pass down generations down my line, that's for sure. But yeah, I know it's a really kind of evocative and kind of emotional thing to pass along what you've been cooking and what you've done in your day to day.
I've got another example here, actually. So I'm holding up, it's a book from the 1890s, but what's lovely about this one, and I was given this, people just give me books, which is lovely. It's got all these clippings from the 1930s from old recipes. And this is an old housekeeper that worked in Wales.
Okay, so it's like little newspaper clippings and bits that they found, and like a scrapbook almost.
Yeah, so what I'm holding up is a Stews for Cold Days by Elizabeth Craig.
Oh, everyone needs stews for cold days. That's
lovely,
brilliant. So have you seen any recipes that you'd like to make and can't because ingredients have changed or text changed? Yeah, because you see a lot of things with, like, I don't know, I think people tend to share the more weird recipes, or what seems weird to us, like pig's trotters and things that we don't tend to eat so much of nowadays.
I can get into big rants about that.
No, go on, tell us what's your thoughts.
Just what TV tends to concentrate on is the bizarre and the disgusting, and so you've got this. I think a lot of people have an idea that historic food is really, really not very nice, and food now is much better. But if you think of some of the processed food that we eat now, and some of the disgusting things that I see in the shops, they relied very much on seasonal food. Also, that nose how eating was very much there. So you use the whole animal. So you do get things done with tripe and stuff like that, brains, but actually a lot of that is really delicious.
Yeah, it's great for gravy as well. I mean, that's who at Christmas doesn't shove the giblets in their gravy to.
Well, it's best bit, isn't it? Yeah, of course. And what you find in all these old recipe books is a sort of, they're very passionate about using everything and using everything in the right way, and the books just read like as almost like what we should be doing now in the future. I think to think more carefully about what we're eating, and to start cooking properly, because that's how they did it. So less of the meal kits, more just going back to cooking simple food that's really tasty. Yeah, and that's what a lot of historic food is. It's tasty food cooked well and done simply. Yeah.
Oh, I like that. So is there anything though that you've seen and gone, I really wish I could cook that, but I don't know how I'd get hold of the ingredients?
Well, I've always wanted to use, there's something called isinglass, which they use to make jellies. And it's the floating sac of a cod fish, I think it is, which is almost impossible to get now. So I'd love to, it's just really nerdy. I'd love to try that. And the thing I don't want to try, which it's the one thing in the book that I just couldn't stomach, is Sparrow Dumplings.
What's that?
Well, you take a whole sparrow, you cover it in pastry, and then You boil it.
Oh,
And
I wonder whether it would be like gamey.
Yeah. They've got them. I think it's ortolans, isn't it? In France, they eat them whole, and they crunch
Okay.
through the bones. And so it's that idea. So you've got this tiny little bird that you just, because the bones are so soft, they just like crunch through the whole thing. I just could you do that? And it's
No.
No.
Did France have quite a big influence on our food at all, or the food of the rich? Because I mean, it does now. We tend to look at French food as kind of the creme de la creme, don't we? I suppose.
It's like anything, because I study history of art, and what you find is that art follows money, or money follows art. Well, yeah, whichever way. So the countries that are wealthy have the best cuisines, and originally that was Italy, then it moved to France, then it moved to England. So and even Holland back in its time had a period as well when the food was brilliant. And so all this food, all this money moves around, so they all influence each other. And at one point, especially, probably about beginning of the 19th century anyway, French food was very in vogue. And you've got people like Carême, who's he was the cook to, well, for a few years, cook to the Prince Regents. And he cooked amazing things, and everybody wanted then after that a French cook. And so, people would pay to have these French cooks just come in maybe for an evening, much to the annoyance probably of the female cook. It would just be pushed to one side for an evening while this male cook came in and took over. And male cooks would have been paid double the price of a female cook, so they were expensive and very much wanted. You wanted a male cook.
Oh, really? They were in vogue.
Like either you wanted, you wanted either French cook or French male cook. French male cook is the top, or French cook, and then you go down to the female cooks.
Yeah. So would they have been trying things like escargot, and is that the kind of things that France might have brought over, or that's obviously a complete stereotype? And I'm not, I'm a terrible cook, so I don't know very much about food at all. So.
But the things I've tried, I've not tried that. The things I've tried, and these are lovely. They something called a fanchinette. And what you have in a fanchinette is, and this is very French, you've got this a puff pastry layer. Underneath, on top of that is a sort of layer of custard. And they used to flavour all sorts of things like raisins and rum, maybe chocolate. Then on top of that, you've got a meringue layer. And then you bake it all in different stages in the oven. You've got this lovely sort of delicacy that you eat. And this was served to the Prince Regents by Carême as one of the dishes. And I've made them, and they're absolutely delicious. So fancinettes, they're called.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah. So you've got this really real vogue for French desserts. They really love that. And also the French sauces. You've got, all those different sauces that they have. That's very, very much in trend at this point as well. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I meant to ask earlier as well, when you were talking about puddings, what the pastry, that whatever it is that's encrusting the food inside, especially if it was meat, what was that made out of? Was that suet like it is nowadays, or?
Yeah, there's all different ones, but suet is mainly. But they also have these they either have really thick puddings, a bit like Christmas pudding now, quite sturdy.
Yeah.
It's very light puddings as well, which are almost liquid.
Okay.
So something called a hasty pudding, which is quite nice. And the cloth really contains it. So it almost goes in liquid. And when it boils, it will, when it steams and boils, it will slightly solidify, but you get the sort of quivering pudding as well, which is delicious. A bit like a really set custard.
Yeah.
And if you think of the what they also did then, instead of putting them in cloths, if you were very posh, you put them in pastry, and that's actually the origins of something like baked hot tart.
Okay.
Egg batter, egg batter with almonds, and we've added the jam as well, and that's put into pastry case and then baked in the oven. So you get this quivering. Those cheesecakes as well. That's where all that originates from as well.
Okay, I love cheesecake. Cheesecake, my favorite.
Originally done in sort of pudding cloths, eventually done in pastry.
Okay, and what about savory puddings? Because I not everybody watching, especially perhaps if you're in America, might not be quite so familiar with the idea of savory puddings, or puddings being a savory dish and not just a dessert.
Yeah, things like bacon roly-poly. Have you had that? I love that.
No, I've never had bacon roly-poly. What's bacon roly-poly?
Oh, it's a roly-poly without, usually a roly-poly is basically it's suet pastry that's been rolled up around a filling. In this case, it's sort of bacon mix, but you can also do it with jam.
Yeah.
Which is the usual one. So it's the same idea. You've got a sort of Swiss roll that's been, what they used to do is, I've got a shirt here. They would have just taken off the shirt and used that to wrap the pudding in. So that's why they're that shape. So,
oh, really? Okay. So Paul's just holding up his arm for anyone who's listening on the podcast version, and you've got a very kind of, oh, is it a Regency shirt? Yeah. So it's got a Regency shirt on with lovely sort of billowing sleeves. So they would have taken that off and wrapped your pudding on it, and then then washed it and stuck it back on the next day, I'm guessing.
Well, no, you old church. That's how
old shirts. Okay, I thought you meant like literally as they were cooking, they would have, like they had like, removable sleeves for a second there, so you could just, cook.
In times of need. But that's why you got that shape. That shape of the roly poly. That's because it's a shirt.
Yeah. So would poorer people that were kind of relying on street food, would they have had access to sweet, to some sort of dessert type foods, or just fruit, or fruit? How accessible would fruit have been?
It is, but no, I'm not quite sure, because I haven't studied so much about the working class. I know they used to sell it. You've got these. There's a book here about the cries of London. Have you?
Yeah, Henry Mayhew.
Yeah,
it's brilliant.
There's a book there, and you can see all these people, cherries. So, that stuff does come in, especially into the cities. So yeah, I don't know how expensive and how affordable it was for a lot of the working poor there.
Yeah, you had orange sellers back in Charles was it Charles I or Charles II? I can't think of Nell Gwyn is who I'm thinking of, and I can't think which Charles she's the mistress of, but yeah,
they used to sell them in the Theatre Royal in Drury Lane outside. That's right, in baskets. They're expensive snacks for the rich at that point.
I it's probably easy to underestimate just how many jobs relied on food and the selling of food as well. I've got some ancestors that were basket weavers in Covent Garden, and obviously that's probably, that's why they were living on Covent Garden. They would have been making the baskets that all the food and all the goods that were sold there would have been distributed and sold in. So it kind of has this big knock-on impact onto all these different job roles.
Yeah, well, you can see baskets were used for everything. They were even used in building. When they had baskets for bricks and stuff like that. So anything we use, anything we contain now in plastic or buckets or stuff, you'd have the basket for it. So baskets are incredibly important.
Yeah, it's easy to forget, I think. Just anytime you look at anything plastic, remember that wouldn't have been there. They would have had to have had a different solution. Oh, brilliant. Just before we go, I'll just ask you one last question, because I know that you do these cooking courses. How are you doing them at the moment with the pandemic? Are they online?
Yeah, so normally I do them in the kitchen. So we get up like 8 people in the kitchen, and we actually stand in that old kitchen making the old recipes. So when I was talking in the beginning, I was talking about how we how magical it is to be in that kitchen. I try and get other people to experience that too. So online it's a bit tricky, but I've managed to do it. So I do it from my own kitchen, and I get people now from all over the world. So South Africa, I had Australia, France, and last time, and I do like Christmas pudding courses. I did. I've got hot cross bun course coming up. There will be a pie course later as well, which I want to do. So
that sounds brilliant, and they're all historic recipes.
Yeah,
so
historic recipes.
Actually give it a try themselves.
Yeah, so what I do is I take historic recipes, slightly adapt it, and then send it out to people. And what's lovely is these recipes then get another life. They start getting made somewhere else. So they were languishing in this old book, and now I'm sort of sending them out to the world to lead a fulfilled life somewhere else for other people.
That's brilliant. Do you find that people adapt them themselves as well? And,
and
pass them on.
Perfectly fine. Yeah, it doesn't matter, does it? But I love that idea of recipes carrying on. So many of these old recipes get lost or forgotten, and to give them another life, I think is really wonderful.
No, I do too. So where if anyone's interested, where I will put it in the notes as well, but where can they come and find you?
So the best place is my own website. It's www.paulcouchman.co.uk. And also I'm on Twitter as the Regency Cook. I'm on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook as the Regency Cook. And yeah, come and join me, because especially on Twitter, we just chat about food all the time. It's, what could be nicer?
Yeah, I love reading the recipes that you share, and all the bits. And I love on Instagram, I love seeing the restoration of the Regency townhouse as well, which is in Brighton, and is one of the top of my list to come and visit after the pandemic, when we're allowed to go out in person again, and I can't wait to see it.
You'd love it, honestly, you would.
I'm absolutely sure I would. Oh, Paul, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. I could talk all day, but I know you have another meeting to go to, so I will let you off the hook. And thank you very much for joining me today.
My absolute pleasure. It's been great fun chatting with you today.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit subscribe or visit me at www.genealogystories.co.uk.